Welcome to the Dad Nation podcast, the place where high-performing men are empowered to reclaim their home, their health, and their happiness while enhancing their career success. You see, in a world full of noise, burnout, and mediocrity, we believe what's missing is courageous and compassionate leadership in the home, because when the dad gets better, the whole family wins. You see, this isn't just a podcast. It's a movement of men who refuse to settle for less in our families, our focus, and our future. We are curse breakers and we are legacy makers. And I'm your host, Mitchell Osmond, and I'm honored that you have chosen to invest your most valuable asset, which is your time with me today. Now let's get into it. Well, welcome friends to the Dad Nation podcast. I hope you are excited about today's episode because I know I am. I know if you're listening to this and you are a leader, you're an entrepreneur, you want some tools or tips or hacks, today's going to be a great conversation for you to be locked in with, because today I'm talking with my friend Ryan Gottfredson, who's a Ph.D., is a cutting-edge leadership development author, researcher, and consultant. He helps organizations vertically develop their leaders, primarily through a focus on mindsets. Ryan is the Wall Street Journal and a USA Today best-selling author of Success Mindsets, The Elevated Leader, and Becoming Better. He is also a leadership professor at the College of Business and Economics at California State University, Fullerton. I am excited to have him on the show today. So listen, Ryan, let's jump into it, brother. Welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me. And thanks for creating such a great platform for men who I feel like fit who I am, which is a dad, a spouse, a husband, and somebody, a leader, and somebody who wants to become better in all of those domains. And I've kind of made it my life work to try to figure that out. So I appreciate the opportunity to share some ideas with you and with your audience.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you're here, man. Appreciate your time. It's going to be a great conversation. So, a question I love to ask people is, what made you get into this? Like when you were at your kindergarten graduation, were you saying, when I'm a big boy, when I grow up, I'm going to be a leadership coach, I'm going to be a published author? What kind of got you into this space, man?
Yeah, almost. But I'll fast forward from being a kindergartner to being a senior in high school.
Great.
And I grew up playing sports, and my high school offered a class that I'm not sure it's offered anywhere else. I guess it probably is, but the class was sports psychology. And I was like, oh man, this is going to be awesome. It's going to elevate my athletic performance. And I got into the class, and I still remember the books that we read. We had to read 4 books in a semester. The first one was Stephen R. Covey's 7 Habits. Then I read 3 different books by basketball coaches. One by Pat Riley, one by Mike Krzyzewski, and another one by Rick Majerus, the former head coach at University of Utah. And I remember just eating up these books, loving them. And I remember thinking as a senior in high school, if I could write books like this for a career, that would be awesome. And so I kind of had that thought, but then I was like, well, I don't even know how to do that. I don't even know what the path is to doing that. So I just kind of forgot about it, or I just kind of put it in the back of my mind. But fast forward about 3 years later, I was living in Boston, Massachusetts, and I met a Harvard Business School professor, and I asked him, well, what do you teach? And he said, organizational behavior. And I said, what's that? And I don't remember his answer, but I remember a thought that occurred in my head, which was, this is like sports psychology, but for business. I think I found what I want, right? I think I found the path. And so I ended up doing a Ph.D. in organizational behavior at Indiana University. And then I studied leadership. That was the focus of my dissertation. And that provided the foundation in which I've been able to build off of to where I'm at now.
That's amazing. That's pretty forward thinking for a senior in high school to be thinking, I want to be an author one day. I don't know a lot of people who think like that at that age,
Well, I think one of the things that has always resonated with me is this notion or idea of just becoming better. And if I'm being honest with you, I think when I was a senior in high school, it came from a place of insecurity. right? I think it came from a place of, if I could become better, more people will like me. And now, I think I've grown and matured since then. And now the purpose is much more deep and much more meaningful. And that's part of the reason why I love the platform that you've created, is because it's now less about me and it's much more about my sphere of influence, the people around me, and how I could become a brighter light to them. And so it isn't about me being loved and accepted as much as I love that. It's about my ability to give love and to give acceptance in the world around me. And it's taken a great personal transformation to get there. And I'm not done yet, but I'm just been riding the wave, taking the journey.
I love it. I love it. You know, it's interesting you mentioned that, because that's actually a similar journey that I was on. You know, I wrestled with the idea of calling and purpose for a long time. And there were times in my life, you know, where I had thought it was one thing and then I do it and it was something else, and just sort of had this insatiable appetite and didn't quite know how to satiate myself in this area. And so I read a book called The One Thing, and by Gary Keller, I believe it was. And essentially the book was all about how to whittle everything that you like or love or whatever passions down to one thing that you want to make your entire life about. And for me, I went on this like 2-year self-discovery journey. And what I came to understand from that book, and I surveyed all of my friends and family and like just a ton of stuff, was that the thing that I am the most passionate about, my one thing, is growth. You know, some might call that development. If I am involved in the business of growth for myself and for others in any capacity, then I am on fire. You know, and then I looked around my life, and at the time I was teaching music. I was a part of a startup that was helping other people learn music. I was a pastor, helping people grow spiritually. But essentially everything that I was doing in my life was about helping people move from point A to point B. And I had come from losing like 50 pounds and this whole journey, and I was obsessed. And then I was like, man, if I could just make my life about that, I think that would be my thing. Yeah. And so that's actually why I started. That's part of the reason why I started this podcast, because I realized, and it was a little bit meta, I feel like, but I was like, I want to dedicate my life to growing, not just for myself, but for others. And if I can help other men grow in their marriages, grow in their mindset, grow in their fitness, grow in their fatherhood, if I can do that, then that's a life worth imitating. That's an amazing life. And so that's actually why I started this as well. So that's cool, man. I see some parallels.
Yeah, that's growth. Is fulfillment. I think that there's almost equivalent in my mind.
Well, yeah, and there's this constant tension between growth and discomfort. And so, like, if you want to, and this took me a while because I started to unpack it, and the further I got down that journey, the more uncomfortable it was. But I was like chasing comfort, but at the same time, I was chasing growth, which is like impossible. Like, you can't have both. And so it took me a while to like understand, like, okay, well, yeah, if I want to grow and I want to help others grow, that means I got to stretch. If I got to stretch, that means I'm going to be uncomfortable. So I kind of swore to a life of discomfort along that way, you know?
Well, so one of the things that I'm recognizing about what you did is you have, as part of your journey, you widened your window of tolerance for short-term discomfort in order to create greater value in the long term.
Yes.
And that lesson right there is what most people never learn. So here's one of the things that I've learned in my study of helping people to grow, helping people to develop, is that there's really two different ways that we can develop ourselves. And we are very familiar with one path or one way, and we are not familiar with the other path. But the other path is transformational if we can get on it. So kind of stating this otherwise, I've learned that most people do not know how to become better versions of themselves. So if it's okay, let me just kind of give you an overview of these two different paths. So I think it's helpful to recognize that we have two different sides of ourselves. One side of ourselves is our talent, our knowledge, our skills, and abilities. So if you think about a great golfer like Tiger Woods, he is somebody that's really far out there on the doing side. He's got great knowledge and great skills around the sport of golf. But if you know anything about Tiger Woods, while he's a great golfer and people admire him for that, he's had some controversy in his life. And that controversy isn't connected to his doing side. It's connected to a different side of himself. And that side is what I call our being side. And the being side is the quality and sophistication of our body's internal operating system. Literally, the degree to which we are wired for value creation in the long term over self-protection in the short term. And if we study like any people who have big controversies around them, what we're going to find is that they are lower in altitude along their being side. But here's the thing that's tricky about this is when you think about our education systems, our athletic programs, and most of our organizational development effort, almost all of it focuses on improving along our doing side. That's what's called horizontal development. So we're familiar with that. We know how to develop new knowledge. We know how to develop new skills. But what I've kind of learned is that form of development at best is only incrementally helpful. It's kind of like we're adding tools onto our tool belt, right? That's helpful. But when we focus on our being side and elevating along our being side, that's what we call vertical development. And that's more akin to upgrading the person wearing the tool belt. And that vertical development side of personal development is what most people aren't familiar with. And therefore, they rarely take the path of vertical development. But what I heard in your story was, you may have not taken that path consciously, but you took that path, right? And it's a path that I don't think there's a final destination, but it's a path that can be transformational. Did that make sense? Or do you have any questions on that?
No, I love it, man. You're coaching me. This is great. No, so what I'm hearing you say, and this is actually, it's great that you jumped. That was a great segue because this is what I was going to ask you about. Because you talk a lot about being like doing better versus being better, and horizontal development versus vertical development. So what I'm hearing you say, Ryan, is that there is two ways of growth. One way is by simply doing better, which is maybe sharpening the tools in your tool belt or learning more tools. And that's a horizontal kind of development. And that's fairly normal. And maybe for those who do develop, that's the more common route. And a better maybe suggestion or an alternative, what I hear you saying is this idea of being better from inside out. This creates this vertical development. And that's not just improving the tool belt, but improving the person wearing the tool belt. Did I get that correctly?
Yep, spot on. Yes.
I love it. I love it. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, so what I found that's really helpful for us to understand is if we want to elevate ourselves, elevate our being, and truly become better, there's really three things that we need. One, we need to understand that we do have this being side, so we can unpack that a little bit more. But then two, we need to be able to evaluate our altitude along our being side. And so there's some frameworks that are out there that are helpful for doing that. And then once we understand what our current altitude is, and we get a sense of what a higher altitude might be, then we could go about doing the work of elevating along our being side. So those are, in my mind, are kind of the three steps of vertical development.
Okay, so we need to first of all understand, so I'm taking notes because I love this, man. Need to understand that we do have a being that can be developed. Number two is understanding what our altitude is. And then the third step is more execution focused, like actually elevating up to that altitude. Is that correct?
Spot on. Yep.
Okay. I love that. So this is great, man. We're just jumping right in. So can you walk me through a scenario of maybe a potential, like a person? So we got a lot of dads listening, got a lot of entrepreneurs listening, business leaders, you name it. So I love this essentially framework, what you're talking about here. So can you give us maybe an avatar or a person who might be on this journey and how they would go from, walk through that framework of step 1, 2, and 3? Does that make sense?
Yeah. In fact, I think what'll be, let me lay out a framework and then I'll come back to an avatar if that's
Sure.
okay.
Yeah.
Um,
Hey, brother, if you are listening to this show, you've most likely built a successful career. You handle pressure, you lead teams, and you get results. But when was the last time you really connected with your wife beyond the calendar, the kids, and the to-do list? Well, if that sounds like you, I have a free gift for you today called the Connection Code. Which are 50 questions to break the silence, spark the fun, and bring the fire back. These questions are going to help you learn what she truly desires from you, to break out of the routine and to rediscover fun, and to spark deeper passion and connection without forcing awkward conversations. Listen, most men assume their wives feel loved, but the best husbands ask great questions and keep the connection alive. So if your date nights feel more like board meetings, and if you've gone from soulmates to roommates, and I want you to download this connection code for free and start the kind of conversations that bring you closer tonight. You can grab your copy at dadnationcode.com/code or hit the link in the show notes below. All right, let's get back into it.
So there's a framework that's out there. It stems from the adult development psychology literature. And what adult development psychologists have studied, developmental psychologists as a whole study development stages. And so we know a lot about childhood development stages, and that as children go from infants to adults, they go through a number of different stages. But for the longest time, developmental psychologists kind of assumed that adults didn't develop in adulthood, that you're kind of done when you hit adulthood. But what they found over the research over the last 60 years is that adults can develop, and there's in fact 3 primary adult development stages. And these all correspond to kind of our vertical development altitude. But what's interesting about what they've found is that while adults can develop, most don't. So the research is across all adults, 64% stay at the base level, at the same development stage that they come into adulthood with. 35% get to that second level, and only 1% gets to that first level.
Wow.
And then let me throw on some additional statistics, because if we just look at executives, what we find is these percentages are actually quite different. So if we look at just executives, 8% operate at the base level, 85% operate at that second level. So most leaders get to that second level, but only 8% get to that top level.
So 8% of that 1% get to the top level. Is that kind of what we're saying?
Just if you take only executives.
I
So
see.
1% of the entire population, what we find is only 1% get there. So 1 out of 100. But if we take 100 executives, we'll find 8 up there in that top level.
I have so many questions about the 1%, but continue with the framework.
Well, yeah. So let's dive in, if it's okay. Let's understand what these 3 levels are and what distinguishes at each of these levels. So one of the things that's helpful for us to understand is that at each level, our bodies are wired to fulfill different needs. Literally, at each level, we kind of take on different programming. So at that base level, our primary program is to fulfill the needs of safety, comfort, and belonging.
Mm-hmm.
And that's all kind of a short-term orientation. I only want to do the things that will make me feel safe, comfortable, and like I belong. And so, what we do at this level is we want to join groups that will help us to feel safe, comfortable, and like they belong. That could be a family group, a friend group, a social group, an employer group, a religious group, right? And when we join these groups, we step into these groups and we don't say, I want to take charge. What we say is, I don't want to take charge. If you'll just tell me what to do, I will do it, provided you keep me safe, comfortable, and feeling like I belong. And so this is most people. 64% of all adults kind of operate in this mold. And when we operate in this mold, now, of course, if we're here, we don't feel this way, but what we're doing here is we're giving up our power and independence to others in exchange for our safety, comfort, and belonging. In other words, when we operate at this level, we are largely operating as dependent thinkers. And that's one of the hallmarks about this level. So wired for safety, comfort, and belonging, and then we operate as dependent thinkers. Does that make sense?
Yes, I love this. I can tell I'm going to like this because it's great language, and it helps make sense as to probably why we think the way we think. But yeah, okay, keep going with number 2 then.
So perfect. So number 2, our needs are going to dramatically change. So here, our needs are to stand out, advance, and get ahead. And this is a dramatic shift in our needs because now we're willing to be unsafe, uncomfortable, and not belong in order to stand out, advance, and get ahead. And we also make this shift from being a dependent thinker to being an independent thinker. Now I have my own ideas and beliefs. I'm willing to push back against my group's beliefs. And now I've got my good ideas that I want to put to the test. And that's why we see 85% of leaders operate at this level. And what I almost heard you say in your story, right, is I heard from you as I made this transition from safety, comfort, and belonging up to a higher level, which was probably at least initially to stand out, advance, and get ahead. Right. And I would say the same thing about my journey is I used to never want to be an entrepreneur. Why? Because it felt risky and dangerous, particularly in the short term. But once I started to vertically develop, then I was like, oh, well, now I want to write a book. Oh, and guess what? I want that book to hit the bestseller list, right? Because I want to stand out, I want to advance, and I want to get ahead. And I don't know what your motivations were for starting a podcast, but there's probably part of that, at least, that's about, it's making a name for myself in a way. Now, I think there's more to it than that, or I sense there's more to it than that.
Yeah.
But maybe there's part of that fueled some of the decision making in that as part of that process. So that's that second level. So wired to stand out, advance, and get ahead.
I love that. Yeah, it's making so much sense, man, because definitely there was a time in my life, and I know the listeners, I want you to, as you're hearing Ryan talk about this, if this is resonating with you, I want you to place yourself into these development stages and sort of see where you're at, and envision where you could be, or what your own journey. But for my journey, certainly, man, there was the vast majority of my life was stage 1 of like, I wanted to be safe, I wanted to be comfortable, I wanted to belong. I was very tribal, like, hey, I want to take charge, I just want to stay in a tribe, right?
Yep.
I had no interest in being independent. And then there were some pivotal moments, some catalytic events that shook me. And then my thinking changed on a fundamental level. And almost out of nowhere, like overnight, I woke up and I was like, things need to be different.
Yeah.
And then as I started to take more ownership, that hunger to stand out, to advance, to move ahead, the willingness to depart from safety, the desire to be in charge and to be independent certainly grew. And what happened, and maybe you can speak to this before we go to step 3, but those in my life kind of started to get a little bit uncomfortable because I was doing things, saying things that I hadn't necessarily done before. I was like, whoa, don't stir the waters here. Like you're good, you're safe. Like just stay there, right? Do you see that in your clients or in people in this process?
Oh, for sure, right? Because to your point is as you make that bump up, you start to speak a different language. And when you start to speak a different language and they're still at that base level, then they're now starting feeling a little bit uncomfortable. Oh, I'm not sure I could belong with this person anymore because he's speaking a different language or she is speaking a different language. And so in a way, it kind of grates at almost this subconscious level because we're operating on different planes.
Yeah, that's so good. That's so good. And you know what's interesting, and I'll share this because I'm not sure if I shared this on the podcast yet, but I'm not sure when this actual episode is going to be airing, maybe in August. But, I found out just a little while ago that podcast ended up in the top 10% globally. I had no idea. And so this is so good, man, because literally, man, when I found that out, my first thought was, okay, well, how do I go from top 10% to top 5%? Right? Wow. And fearless. Or like, how do I go from 33,000 listeners to 333,000 listeners? and there was no fear, there was no trepidation. Now, let's flash back to a year and a half ago when I launched the podcast, and I think I've shared this before. One of my friends had shared a reel of this podcast on his personal page and shared it and tagged my personal account. And not a lot of people knew I was doing it at that time. And I went up and I saw that he shared it. And I went up to my wife who was with my son in the nursery. And I was like, I think I'm going to puke. Because now everyone's going to know that I'm doing this podcast, and it scared the crap out of me, dude. Because I'm like, well, what if, and I was battling with this imposter syndrome, self-limiting beliefs. But that reaction back then, even just a year and a half ago, was terror, fear, right? Anxiety. And then it just a year and a half, 2 years later, finding out this new milestone, this new thing, which if I was thinking with my old brain, I would have thought, holy cow, 33,000 people, I'm sick to my stomach. What if I say the wrong thing? Or what if all this fails? But no. Now I'm like, all right, let's double down.
Yeah.
So something, I think, as I'm hearing this framework, something has been shifting in my mind, because now I'm thinking on a different level, right?
For sure. Yeah. You've upgraded that internal operating system, how you're wired to process your world, for sure. That's good.
Love that. So good, man. Thank you for processing with me. So let's move on to step number 3.
Yeah. So this third level, so remember at that first level, we're wired to stand in. At the second level, we're wired to stand out. Well, at the third level, we don't care as much about standing in or standing out. What we care about is contributing, adding value, and lifting others. So now when we're at this level, the why for why we operate is now that something bigger than ourselves. It's a value creating purpose. And when we get to this level, we make this shift from dependent thinker to independent thinker to now at this third level is what we would call it an interdependent thinker. We could think in more and operate in more complex ways than ever before. And that's this third level.
So wired to stand in, wired to stand out, and then the third level, contributing, adding value. What was there was another one.
And lifting others. Yeah.
And lifting others.
Right. So, and I sense is anybody who I've met, kind of when they create a podcast, there's generally one of two reasons. One, they want to become well known, or two, because they want to create value, or some combination of the two of them. Right. And I think that's where, the best podcasts, the ones that people continually come back to, they do it because it's coming from a host that operates more at that third level because they want to create value for the audience, as opposed to, hey, see me type thing. And that's ultimately, and that's why this step can be so transformational, is because it goes from like, if I'm a leader at that second level, what I focus on is numbers, results, outcomes. And so when I talk to executives, one of the first questions that I'll ask them is, how do you measure success in your business? And if they answer something like double-digit growth year over year, I know what level that they're operating at. But if they answer by saying, well, our purpose is to, so we measure success by the degree to which we fulfill that purpose. Yeah. Well, now that feels like that third level leadership. And just unfortunately, we don't get a lot of people up there, but that's kind of why I do what I do. Because I feel like if we could help people understand this framework, understand this idea of vertical development, we can open the path for more people to get up there to that third level.
I love that, man. That's powerful. Just for some context for you, one of the pivotal turning points for me was, and my listeners will know this story, most likely, but I was attending a funeral. I was actually singing at this funeral of this wealthy philanthropic man, and the pastor was talking about this life that he had lived, and he said, he challenged the congregation and said, are you living a life worth imitating? If you were to die tomorrow, would people look at the life that you've lived and want to live a life like that? Is it worthy of imitation? And at that point in my life, I was like, man, if I walked outside this church and got hit by a bus, no one would want my marriage. Nobody would want my bank account. Nobody would want my body, my health. And so I thought to myself at that point, number one, I need to take control, take ownership of my own life. And then as I started to do that, I started to help others do the same, get out of debt, lose weight, restore their marriage, just friends of mine. And then I began to see the power and in that transformation, but using that story to help others, right? Using that transformation to make sure that I can do my part in helping as many men as possible restore their marriages and restore their health and restore their happiness or their mindset or break free of stress or anxiety or just different things like that. And so for me, that was a byproduct of like, well, if I could use all this to help people, then that'd be cool, right? But at first I want to get ahead myself,
Yeah.
And now flash forward to, that was 8 years ago. Now that is what when I was saying to my wife a little while ago, I'm like, I think I'm at the place now where I can, if I were to, be on my deathbed tomorrow and draw on my last breath, I think I'd be happy with how I've lived because I've dedicated so much of my life to this point, to helping other men grow closer to their wives, to restore their relationships with their children, to, be better leaders. And that at the end of the day is the truest, I think, fulfillment for me, sharing my story or bringing on high caliber, men like yourself to share your story and teach to help other men get to grow, right? Like we talked about, and to add value and to help them become better. In my opinion, that's a life worth modeling,
Kudos to you, right? You've clearly been on a journey. And I just kind of want to point out to our listeners, as you share your story, you have become the person you have become, not because you have gained more knowledge and more skills.
Yes.
It's because you have upgraded your being, who you are at your very core. Let me point out a couple of things that you've kind of brought up. So one of the things that we've learned about, because I'm sure listeners are thinking, how do I go from one level to the next level? And what we've learned is that really kind of takes three things. The first thing that it takes is what's called a heat experience. And so you, even before you said, if I remember where you said, I had some cataclysmic events, and you dove into this event at this funeral, right? This was a heat experience. Now, heat experiences can be external to us. They could be things that happen to this, like in a way, I found myself in this situation. I got a cancer diagnosis. I lost a family member, whatever it might be. These are all heat experiences. Now, the thing that's interesting about heat experiences is we all have had them, but not everybody has harnessed them for vertical development. So there's external heat experiences. There's also internal heat experiences. We could choose to intentionally try to vertically develop. All right. And I sense you kind of put that on your shoulders after this funeral.
Yes.
Is you are now proactive about, okay, I've got to make some changes, right? Mm-hmm. So that's the first step, is heat experiences. The second step, in order to kind of take advantage of those heat experiences, is we've got to engage in what's called colliding perspectives. So in a way, we've got to start banging our worldview that we grew up with against alternative worldviews. That doesn't mean we have to agree with those other worldviews, but we've got to start banging our head against these other worldviews, because what we're going to learn is that there's some aspects of our worldview that aren't serving us well. And we're going to learn that there's other aspects of others' worldviews that will serve us better. And so one of the things that I've learned about a part of that process is vertical development is almost as much about letting go as it is about grabbing on, because we've got to let go of our previous worldviews. And then when we could do these things, that leads to the third key, which is elevated sense making. We need to go from a place where we I saw the world in white and black or in shades of gray, and now I see it in terms of the color of the rainbow. And that's when we could kind of get to that more complex way of thinking and processing. That's that elevated sense making. So those are the three, I would say, keys to going from one level to another: heat experiences, colliding perspectives, and then elevated sense making.
Yeah, that's so good. What's an example in your experience, just for the leaders listening? Could you walk us through maybe a common scenario that you see with leaders and how they break through that?
Yeah, for sure. So what I find is that most leaders operate at this second level. And mostly the thing that's interesting about it, this level, is when we get there, we kind of know we're operating on a different plane than most other people. And I think at some level, these leaders kind of sense, oh, well, I've arrived because I'm higher than everybody else, or I'm operating at a higher level than everybody else. And they don't yet recognize that there's that third level up above them. And so what I find is, I would say, some common profiles that I find with leaders and people that operate at this second level is that they are hard chargers, particularly men. They're kind of, have you ever driven a manual transmission?
Oh, yeah.
Right? So I'm going to compare these leaders to us driving along. If we've got let's just keep it simple, 5 speeds or 5 gears in my car, I'm in 4th gear. Well, 4th gear is awesome. Well, it's awesome because I could drive super fast and I feel the speed, right? The car you just feel the torque, the energy going on there. And that feeling is addicting. And it's all about what's the next accomplishment? What's the next milestone? How do we get there as fast as humanly possible, right? And that's the gear that these leaders are stuck in. And people, we know this, people can be wildly successful in 4th gear, but it's not the pinnacle, right? And the scary thing about this for these leaders that I work with is, if you're driving a manual transmission and you want to shift gears, let's say from 4th to 5th gear, what's the first thing you have to do? Well, unless you're a power shifter, the first thing you do is you pull your foot off of the gas. And that idea of pulling your foot off of the gas, rubs against the grain of these second level leaders. That's the last thing that they want to do. But they have this hard time seeing this longer term perspective, because if I could pull my foot off the gas, stick in the clutch and throw it into 5th gear, now, I might have slowed down a little bit in the short term, but the power of being in 5th gear is I could accelerate even faster and operate at lower RPMs. But it's just uncomfortable for these leaders that are so used to operating in 4th gear. And so what I just generally am finding is I get these hard charging leaders who have been wildly successful because of their hard chargingness. But the byproduct of this is what we start to see as collateral damage around them when they think about their relationships with their spouses, with their children, with their business partners, with the people that they lead. Generally, these hard-charging leaders are burning out the people around them. And it's really only those top-level leaders so in a way, these hard-charging second-level leaders, they pull life from their environment. These top-level leaders, they give life to their environment. And that's one of the biggest differences.
Wow. That's so, as you explain that, man, I think we can all, whether we are leaders ourselves, we can all recognize that phase or that step. Or if you've had a leader in your life, you can probably recognize, when you list some of those characters, a hard-charging leader. And I love that distinction between, how is it you phrased it, that the hard charging leader is drawing energy from people or the environment?
They draw the life from their environment. Yeah.
And then the third level is giving life to their environment.
Yeah.
Wow. I love that. Okay. So let's just drill into this, for example, because we know as per your statistic, if 35% of people get to the second level, right, and only 1% get to the third level, which is where we're contributing, adding value, lifting others, getting to 5th gear, right? How do we go from the 35% to the 1%? How do we go from level 2 to level 3?
Yeah, so I think I'll phrase it this way. So one of the things that I've learned is that the more hurt we have experienced in our lives, like trauma, the more our body becomes wired for self-protection, and it wants to pull inward for safety, comfort, and belonging. And one of the things that we've learned is that 70%, at least 70% of adults have experienced trauma in their life to the degree that it has caused them to pull inward. And I think that that's one of the reasons why so many people operate at that base level, is because so many of us have been through shit. And so when we recognize this, one of the things that, and this is why this is so meaningful to me, is we recognize that if we want to get up to these higher levels, at the end of the day, it really is foundationally about healing our minds, our bodies, and our hearts. Because the more that we can heal our souls, if you will, the less we focus on our own self-protective needs, and the more that we could focus on the creating greater value in the world around this. So if it's okay, let me share a couple of steps in my journey to kind of bring that to life. So,
yeah. Hey, brother, does this sound familiar to you? Maybe you're powerful at work, you're respected, you're competent, you're driven, but when you walk through the door at home, you feel like a stranger. Maybe your marriage feels distant. Maybe your temper's shorter, your body's softer, and you've been stuck in this loop where you're showing up for everyone except for the people that matter the most. I know that pain because I lived it. And that's why I created the Dad Nation Coalition, which is a 1-year high-level coaching community for career-driven men who are done settling for success in only one area of their life. Inside the coalition, we don't just talk about growth, we build it. You will create a life that your wife wants to be a part of. You'll become a father your kids look up to. You'll wake up proud of the man staring back at you in the mirror. And here's the best part, you won't do it alone. You'll be surrounded by a brotherhood of men who will challenge your excuses, sharpen your edge, and celebrate your wins like family. In the DNC, you're going to get 12 months of bi-weekly coaching calls with me and the other members of the coalition. You're going to get a customized fitness and nutrition plan designed for your specific goals, and exclusive access to my flagship trilogy called The High Performance Husband. You're going to get a one-to-one mastermind with me where we build your blueprint for success in every area. And lastly, an invitation to our exclusive annual mastermind and retreat. So if you're ready to rebuild your body, reignite your marriage, and rise up as a high-performance man of purpose, then apply today. Go to dadnationco.com/DNC or hit the link in the show notes below. All right, now let's get back into it.
One of the biggest heat experiences that got me from that first level to that second level was I got fired from my job. And I never thought I would get fired. And here's what I knew, is I knew I had the knowledge and skills to be successful. And so it had to be something else that led me to get fired. And that's kind of when I woke into this idea of I've got this being side, and it's my being side that's getting in my way. And so I started to focus on my being side primarily through a focus on mindsets. Because that's where I was doing a lot of research on mindsets, awakening to the quality of my mindsets. And what I learned is that I had very self-protective mindsets. And so by focusing on my mindsets, I think I was able to get, I'm going to say, from that first level to that second level. Well, I'm going through that process. And one of the things that I'm learning, to your point, is I get up to another level. And in many ways, I start speaking a different language than my wife. And there's starting to become some friction between us. And so I'm like, this isn't working, but I want it to work. So let's start therapy. And we agreed to start doing some marriage therapy. And we went through 2 marriage therapists, and it just wasn't working. But then I read a book called The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk, and which is all about trauma and its impact on our body. And I start to realize a lot of the indicators of trauma I see in myself, but I didn't think I had trauma in my background. And so at the end of the book, he presents different trauma healing modalities. And one of these is called EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. And I was like, this sounds like hocus pocus, like your eyes going back and forth, or taps on your shoulders, or pings going back and forth in your ears. And this somehow cures trauma. Like, this is unreal. So I called up my local trauma therapist, or EMDR therapist, And I said, hey, I don't have trauma in my past, but can you help me out? And I'm sure she was laughing, right? Of course, who calls me and doesn't have trauma in their past, right? So we start diving into it. And so what I decided, we stopped the marriage therapy, and I decided I'm working on myself. And so I started working with this trauma therapist. And what I came to learn is that while my parents had always been there for me physically, like they attended every sporting event that I ever played in, they were rarely there for me emotionally. So I experienced as a child emotional neglect. And I didn't realize it till I was in my mid-30s that was kind of my reality. And that had come to shape my internal operating system. And so I spent the next 2.5 years working with this trauma therapist to try to heal my mind, my body, and my heart. And I credit that work. Now, I'm not going to say that I'm like the epitome of this third level person. I still got a lot of work to do on myself. But that's when I started to feel this shift in I'm now focused less on me standing out, advancing, and getting ahead, and more focused on contributing, adding value, and lifting others. And what I've just learned is that if we really want to get to that top level, it generally is going to take some pretty intense healing work, particularly if we've been through shit in our past.
That's huge, man. The Body Keeps the Score is a great book. If you're listening and you haven't read it, listen or read it, listen to it, whatever works for you. But I think it's a little ignorant to think that, that you're above trauma, or that, I think this sort of is a dated mindset, call it, immaturity, call it toxic masculinity, call it whatever you want. But this idea that like, I don't have anything going on. I got it on lock. I got this figured out. I don't need help. If for nothing else, to just simply explore if there is anything going on the inside, to upgrade your software, or to have better education so that you can meet others where they're at, to make space for them, like your spouse or friends, or, you name it, because we've all, whether we like it or not, we've all been impacted in some way or another. So I love that, man.
Yeah, if it's okay, let me share a few points coming back to a few things that we've talked about. So one is, I talked about these hard charging leaders. One of the things that's interesting to me is as I do coaching with them, I don't try to dig into their past traumas, but they will generally naturally bring it up. And most of these leaders have significant trauma in their past, and that fuels, in a way, their hard chargingness. So I found that to be an interesting observation. I also want to clarify, I see different profiles in that second level. One profile is these hard charging leaders, but that's not the only profile. So if you're kind of saying, well, I'm not a hard charger, that I'm not going to say that doesn't mean you're not in that second level. You may just manifest it a little bit differently. And then the third thing that I wanted to mention is, I think coming back to this idea of just almost normalizing this idea of trauma, because what it's done for me is I've come to learn about trauma, its effects on our body's nervous system. The more I feel like it's made me a more compassionate person for the people around me, right? So when people get reactive, I used to be like critical, like, what a loser. Why are they freaking out over this, right? But now it's, what have they been through that has caused them to be so reactive? And I approach people with I'm going to say, a much better place than what I used to. I don't think I'm perfect by any means, but it's been game changing to kind of understand that. So I'll invite people to open that door to investigate, even just learn more about trauma. You brought up we talked about The Body Keeps the Score. I would say another really great book along those lines, and I think it's probably the best starter book, is called What Happened to You. It's written by Bruce Perry and Oprah Winfrey. So it's another good book in that space.
I've recommended that book multiple times over the episodes. It's just an eye-opening, easy read, and can really make you aware of maybe some things that are going on the inside, or make sense of the past. And I think the way they break down the whole topic is brilliant, and it's simple. It's it's good. I've heard this before, and this was not really on my agenda to ask you, but we kind of went there. We dipped our toes there for a second, but just out of curiosity, I've heard people say, every entrepreneur has a chip on their shoulder. Every entrepreneur has something to prove. Every person in major leadership, there is something going on that's giving them that hard charge or that internal drive or whatever. Would you agree with that?
I would say yes for most. I would say even 90%, but I don't think it's 100%. One of the people that I've gotten to know, and I'm very fortunate to have been able to kind of met him and even work with him, is Alan Mulally. He's the former CEO of Ford. He maybe the greatest organizational transformation that's ever occurred under his leadership. So they went from losing $12.7 billion in 2006, and 3 years later, not needing a government bailout during the economic downturn. And it was just this remarkable transformation. And why was that possible? Well, it's because they had Alan Mulally. And I think he's one of the most, like, if you're going to study these third level leaders, he should be at the top of the list. And in talking to him, I don't ever think he's had that chip. He's almost always come from that place of love. In fact, one of the things that he says to me, he's like, I agree with all of the ideas around accountability, but I will never use the word accountability. I said, okay, well, what do you use? And he says, love them up. That's accountability to me, is I just love them up. Right. And so I think, anyways, I just use that and I think that's an extreme example. Right. But I think, to your point, most people, the reason why they bust out of that safety, comfort, and belonging is because they're trying to fulfill an unmet need that has gone on in their life. I mean, you look at Michael Jordan, if you've studied his life, right? Maybe the best basketball player ever, but a complete jerk when he was a basketball player, at least. And I think he was driven because of chips on his shoulder. So yeah, chips can get us up to that second level, but it's the healing from those chips that get us to that third level. And that's where magic happens.
Love it. What's one thing, that maybe a guy, is listening to this and they're thinking, I feel like I'm stuck, that I'm hitting ceilings despite my best efforts. What's one thing they can do today, to start shifting from doing to being?
Oh man. Well, I think the first step always starts with awareness. Deepening our self-awareness. So I'm going to invite you to take a step towards self-awareness. Well, I don't think there's only one step towards self-awareness. I think there's a variety of steps. Let me throw out, if it's okay, throw out some resources that I put together to help people with that process. So if you were to go to my website at ryangottfredson.com, I have two self-assessments. One is a vertical development assessment. The other is a mindset assessment. Those are both tools designed to help people better awaken to their quality of their internal operating system. So that's a place to start. And then there's a whole bunch of resources with that. I also have my new book that's just, by the time this airs, it will have just come out. It's called Becoming Better, The Groundbreaking Science of Personal Transformation. And it walks us through essentially the conversation that we had, which is, if we want to elevate along our being side, we've got to become aware that we have a being side. We've got to evaluate that being side, and then we've got to elevate along that being side. And so the book will dive into depth on everything that we've talked about here.
I love that. And I'm going to check that book out because I'm going to do these assessments, man. I'm such a nerd about this stuff, but I think that's fantastic. Your vertical development assessment, I'm just looking it up right now as we're talking, the personal mindset assessment and your books, which is great. And we're going to have the links to all of those things in the show notes below. If you're like me and you want to grow in your leadership and you want to grow in your organizational impact and raise others up in a more significant way, then you need to follow this guy and get into his space, check out his resources. Love that. And we'll have the links below. Last question for you, Ryan. One thing that I ask every single guest on the podcast is just a little bit about the man that their life that they lived, right? So you said you have children, right?
I do. Yep. 13-year-old and a 10-year-old.
Okay. 2 kids. I want you to picture for a moment that, God forbid you passed away and your wife and your two kids are, the service is over, and the memorial service is over, and everyone's left, and it's just your two kids, and they're sitting around the table, and your wife, and they're just kind of like talking about Dad, talking about who you were, what you did, the man that you were, the husband you were, but specifically your children. If you could have a bit of a fly on the wall experience, and you could overhear the things that your kids would say about the father you were to them while you were here on earth, what would you want them to say?
Well, I guess I hope that there's two veins to their conversation. I hope one of those veins is about my kind of interpersonal relationship with each of them. And that was of high quality, and that they felt loved and they felt cared for. I think the other vein that I would want them to have is I'd want them to talk about me as a role model, as an example. Not that I want them to be like me, but I look at my relationship with my parents as my parents were very much these first level people, and they've both passed away. But they never pushed themselves. They never went for it. And I just hope my children and wife will say, here's somebody that went for it and showed us that it can be done, and we feel more confident that we can go for it in our lives. And so I hope that maybe there's those two different veins there.
I love that. It's a great thing to share, and it's a great thing to leave with your children. It's a great thing to be known for. So love that, Ryan. So friends, I hope you have enjoyed this conversation with Ryan Gottfredson, and it's just another reminder, go to his website, check out his books, and I guess his new book will be out by the time we air this episode. So buy the book, get as much as you can, because this guy is brilliant, has a lot of, obviously, as you've learned today, has a lot of great concepts, and there's a lot that you can learn in elevating yourself and elevating your leadership. Thank you so much, Ryan, for joining us on the show today. We appreciate your time, brother.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And again, thanks for creating this wonderful platform. You're doing an awesome job.
Thank you for tuning into the Dad Nation podcast today. Listen, if today's conversation challenged you, if it encouraged you or helped you level up in any area of your life, would you do me a favor? Take 60 seconds to rate and review the show on whatever platform you're listening on. This helps us reach more men who need to hear this message. And if you haven't already done so, subscribe to the Dad Nation YouTube channel, where you're going to find full episodes, clips, and exclusive content designed to help you win at home just like you do at work. Remember, your family does not need perfection. They need your presence. Your leadership matters. So keep showing up, keep leveling up, and never forget, when the dad gets better, the whole family wins. We'll see you next time.